Our study through 1 Samuel, starting in chapter 11. Now, as we mentioned before, throughout the course of this study, this is interested with the rise of the kingdom in Israel. And so here we don't have every detail that takes place. In fact, we're going to see the first kingship of Saul really kind of start and rise and then kind of fall right there in just 5 chapters. Now, after chapter 15, we're going to continue to see Saul being king, even after David is anointed, there for quite some time, even as he tries to apprehend David and put him to death. But we really see that after chapter 15 that Saul is not going to be in the picture as far as the king of God's people. And so let's look at chapter 11. Now that Saul has been king, he goes back home to his father's farm. He's out there doing the work. But we're going to fast forward to one of the cities on the eastern border of Israel, talking about here about the Amorites. Does anybody remember who the Amorites come from? Came from Lot, exactly. Lot's wife, she's turned to a pillar of salt. He goes to the caves with his 2 daughters. After some things, both of his daughters wind up being pregnant, and 2 nations come out of that, the Amorites. And Steve, do you know what the other nation is? The Moabites, I was thinking. I think it's the Moabites. Could be wrong. That's what I was thinking. Somebody check me on that. It's in Genesis 19. Genesis 19 tells us what 2 nations. I think it's the Amorites and the Moabites. But as you're turning there, if it's not that, just let me know. And so here we do. The Philistines have been tormenting Israel from the western border. And so now that the Israelites have been fighting the Philistines somewhat successfully, but not very much on the west side, here you have the Amorites thinking, well, they're more focused on their western border with the Philistines. We're going to attack from the east. And most countries can't survive a two-front war. What are some of the most well-known two-front wars in history? World War II, exactly. In fact, isn't that why Hitler tried to rush over to the east so quickly through Poland and Russia? Because he knew he wasn't going to be able to fight the Russians on the east side and the Americans on the west side. It looked really good, but Hitler got bogged down there in Stalingrad and never really made it to Moscow. And so, yeah, two-front wars are always really hard. So the Amorites, knowing this, said, well, these guys are focused on our western border with the Philistines. Let's just go take some land. And so here we have the king of the Amorites who goes and he engulfs this Israelite city in Jabesh. And here the Amorite king says, you guys surrender to me. But before you surrender, just let you know, whenever you surrender to me, I'm going to put out every male's right eye. Now, why would he have done this? Brother Rick?
They wore helmets that had cover over their left eye and knew that in battle they would not be deceived with their right eye put out.
Yeah, exactly. Most people are right-handed. Your right eye is your focus eye. And if you've only got one eye, I mean, that's going to severely hinder you in multiple ways. But the number one way is retaliation and fighting back. And so oftentimes when it would be the right eye or another. Can anybody guess what was also a really big common thing to cut off? Your thumb, right? Really hard to hold a sword or a spear if you ain't got a thumb. So a lot of times whenever these towns would surrender or they would conquer these towns, they would go in and cut off their thumbs, their right thumbs. So a little gory detail, but just keeping you awake on a Wednesday night in church. So the people in Jabesh say, can we get a little time to think about the offer? And he says, I'll give you 7 days. So during that 7-day time frame, they send out couriers throughout Israel to garner some sort of help. Saul is out there in the fields working and he hears the commotion. He says, what's going on? And they say, well, the Amorites have gone to Jabesh. They've encircled them, and they're going to take over the city. And so Saul, being the newly elected king, takes 2 oxen, and he cuts the oxen in pieces. And he sends it throughout the entire kingdom and says, this is going to happen to you and your oxen if you don't send soldiers to help. And so he raises up an army. They go to Jabesh, and they take the Amorites, and they run them out. Look at verses 6, 7, and also 11 of chapter 11. Verses 6, 7, and 11. And the Spirit of God rushed upon Saul when he heard these words, and his anger was greatly kindled. And he took a yoke of oxen and cut them in pieces, and sent them throughout all the territory of Israel by the hand of messengers, saying, Whoever does not come out after Saul and Samuel, so shall it be done to his oxen. Verse 11. And the next day Saul put the people in 3 companies, and they came into the midst of the camp. And in the morning watch they struck down the Amorites until the heat of the day, and those who survived were scattered, so that no 2 of them were together. How big of an army did Saul raise?
300,000.
300,000. Is that pretty good size? All right, 3 Neyland stadiums. If you're an Alabama fan, Bryant Denny, even though you guys don't have as many seats as we do. But, not that it's like not that anybody's counting or anything. Anyways, does anybody know the largest battle that's ever taken place in North America? Where's my historians?
North America.
In North America. The Civil War? All right, which battle?
Franklin?
Not Franklin. Not Antietam. Gettysburg. All right? Roughly 200,000 soldiers at Gettysburg. About 120 for the North and 80 for the South. Right? 200,000 is the largest battle ever taken place in North America. And this is greater by 50%. Just Saul's army. Not even including the Amorites. So some massive force, much larger than anything we've ever seen, even in North America. And so Saul takes this large force, he drives back the Amorites, and then people start just praising Saul. Look at verses 12 and 13 of our text. Then the people said to Samuel, Who is it that said, Shall Saul reign over us? Bring the men that we may put them to death. But Saul said, Not a man shall be put to death this day, for today the Lord has worked salvation in Israel. Look at chapter 10, verse 27. In chapter 10, verse 27, it says, this is when Saul was crowned king. It said, But some worthless fellows said, How can this man save us? And they despised him and brought him no present, but he held his peace. So what happened when Saul was crowned king? Always some haters in the bunch, isn't there? Right? You guys know how it is. You elect a deacon, all the other guys are like, man, no, it's too close to home. Never mind. We should pick something else. Anyways, yes. Is there a rewind button up there, Michael? Can we take that out? We'll cut that out later. Okay. All right. Anyways, there's always some haters in the bunch, and that's the same way with Saul. So Saul's popularity is just surging at this point to the fact that people are like, we remember those guys who talked bad about Saul at the inauguration, who didn't bring him any offering, and so let's kill him. And Saul shows his humility, I think, and shows his and says, no, don't worry about that. We're not going to celebrate God's victory with us by killing people just because they're haters. And so here we have Saul. His reign starts on a really positive note. But, unfortunately, here we come to chapter 12.
Yeah.
Yes.
My Bible's calling them the Ammonites. Are the Ammonites and the Amorites the same people, or is this?
They're the same people. So, yeah.
The New King James anyway is saying Ammonites throughout Scripture.
Well, I thought my Bible said Amorites, so mine says Ammonites. So we're going to cut that one out too, Michael. Okay. Maybe they're not. I'll need to recheck that, Steve, or you can recheck that and let us know during class, because it's a good question. They're probably not. So thank you for that. I even got it wrong with the PowerPoint too. Did y'all see that? All right, anyways, chapter 12. So Saul's reign starts off on a really good note. Then we get to chapter 12, and that reign is short-lived. And then in chapter 12, we get Samuel's farewell address. Let's look at verses 1 through 4. In verses 1 through 4 it says, And Samuel said to all of Israel, Behold, I have obeyed your voice in all that you have said to me, and have made a king over you. And now behold, a king walks before you, and I am an old and gray, and behold, my sons are with you. I have walked before you from my youth unto this day. Here I am, testifying against me before the Lord and before his anointed. Whose ox have I taken? Whose donkey have I taken? Or whom have I defrauded? Whom have I oppressed? Or from whose hand have I taken a bribe to blind my eyes with it? testify against me, and I will restore it to you. And they said, you have not defrauded us or oppressed us or taken anything from any man's hand. And he said to them, the Lord is witness against you, and his anointed is witness to this day that you have not found anything in my hand. And they said, he is witness. And so what is Samuel concerned about right here as he begins his speech? What is he concerned? What is he talking about here in these first few verses? That's right. His integrity is complete, right? He hasn't made money off of being the prophet of God. He hasn't taken anything from anybody's hand. He hasn't made Saul king because Saul paid him some sort of bribe. His integrity is intact. Now, as he goes on, he's about to really get on to the Israelites for their idolatry and for them disobeying the commandments of God. So, but before Samuel starts getting on to the people of God for their disobedience, what does he first establish? That he's been obedient. What does Jesus say in Matthew chapter 7, verses 4 through 5? Before you take the speck out of your brother's eye, remove what from your own eye? All right, the beam or the log, right? So what does Samuel establish before he tries to take the speck out of the eyes of the Israelites? Yeah, he says, my eyes are clear, right? Metaphorically, right? There's no speck in my eyes, so now let me help you. All right, why is that important for us today? We need to be like Samuel and make sure that our own eyes are clear, right? Because there's going to come a time or a day where we need to come to somebody and say, look, you've got this going on in your life, and let me tell you what you need, how I can help you. I want to help you. But if we're not living an obedient life ourselves, we can't go to that person and say that. Right? So Samuel says, before I rebuke you for your disloyalty towards God, let me first just establish my own loyalty. Now, Samuel is not trying to be holier than thou right here. He's just trying to say, I'm just trying to establish my own integrity before I talk about yours. Let's look at verses 14 through 15. 14 through 15 says, if you will fear the Lord and serve Him and obey His voice and do not rebel against the commandment of the Lord, and if both you and your king who reigns over you will follow the Lord your God, it will be well. But if you will not obey the voice of the Lord, but rebel against the commandment of the Lord, then the hand of the Lord will be against you and your king. Samuel uses their history in the previous verses to talk about his warning to the people. He talks about how they have rebelled against God in the previous verses before this one and says, if you do the same thing again, the Lord's hand is going to be against you. Why were the nations around Israel trying to take land and taking it successfully? Was it because God wasn't strong enough to take care of His people? Their disobedience. And so Samuel's trying to say, just like your disobedience cost you in your father's generation, if you and your king do not walk by the Lord's command, it's going to happen to you today. What's the takeaway for us today from that obscure passage 3,000 years ago?
We must be obedient as well.
Yeah. Does God expect obedience from His people? What about the people who have the idea, the Bible isn't a rule book, it's a love book? We ain't reading the same book, right? It is a love book, but love comes with rules, right? I mean, there are certain things you can do when you love someone and certain things you cannot do. And the same is true for our love towards God. If we love God, we're going to keep His commandments, right? That almost sounds biblical. Anybody know where that's at? John 14:15, right? Or John 15:10. Exactly. And so here he's saying you've got to be obedient if you want God to bless you and your new king. Let's look at verses 20 and 21 and also verse 24. Starting at verse 20. And Samuel said to the people, do not be afraid. You have done all this evil. Yet do not turn aside from following the Lord, but serve the Lord all your heart. Do not turn aside after empty things that cannot profit or deliver you, for they are empty. Verse 24. Only fear the Lord and serve Him faithfully with all your heart, for consider what great things He has done for you. Once again, he reiterates their blessings upon their obedience. They have been wicked generation after generation, but God is going to give them one more shot. And if you read the rest of the Old Testament, spoiler alert, it's not their last shot. I've talked about this before, I think in our Sunday school class. John Edwards, In the Hands of an Angry God, he paints a portrait of God during the time of the Great Awakening in the 18th century America, where God is this vengeful, spiteful being who's got you over a fire, an eternal fire, and he's got your string right there in front of him with his divine scissors, and he's just waiting for you to sin one time, so he can clip that string and you can burn in hell for all of eternity. It was popular, right? He was one of the most well-known preachers at that time. Is it biblical? No. The Bible tells us time and time again the Lord is long-suffering. He's patient, right? He wants us to repent. He's not going to make us, right? And if we're determined to go to hell, He'll let us. But that's not His wish for any of us. The Bible says that He wants all men to be saved. Let's look at chapter 13. And I'm sorry for the, I can't see the PowerPoint, so I realize that. Miss Pam, where are you at, Miss Pam? Oh, I know I'm messing your notes all up, so I'm sorry. So, chapter 13. All right? Who has a King James Version? Raise your hand. Okay, somebody has King James in the back row? Can you read verse 1, please?
Saul reigned 1 year, and when he had reigned 2 years over Israel.
Okay. Who's got the New King James? All right. Hers said when he had reigned 1 year, and in the second year of his reign. All right. New King James? Somebody raise their hand. Alvin?
Saul reigned 1 year, and when he had reigned 2 years over Israel.
Okay. Who's got an American Standard? Brother Ed?
Saul was 30 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 42 years over Israel.
Okay. Who's got an RSV or an NRSV or an ESV? A GMC?
Which one you want?
Which one you got?
I got all of them.
You got them all. He's got the digital version.
Click the button.
Brittany,
I got ESV.
okay, go ahead and read ESV.
Saul lived 1 year and then became king, and when he reigned for 2 years over Israel.
That's ESV?
ESV.
Okay, when he had lived 1 year, he became king?
Saul lived for 1 year and then became king, and when he had reigned for 2 years over Israel.
Okay, what do you got? Is that the same thing?
Yeah, mine has an ellipses, which just says Saul was years old when he began to reign.
Brittany's has Saul was ... years old.
When he began to reign, and he reigned, another ellipses.
And he reigned ...
And 2 years over Israel.
So they just quit.
Well, the NIV kind of does that. It says 30 and 42, but it says some manuscripts leave out the 30.
Yeah.
Mine has the footnote that the number is lacking in Hebrew and the Septuagint.
Right. I just wanted to read those different versions so you can see the differences of the readings.
Note says Hebrew is difficult.
Yeah, it is. I've taken it. It's pretty hard. And so what we have here, we're not really sure what it is. There's some parts of the manuscript that are missing. It's called ellipses. And so it's really hard to determine. The reason why it has 30 and 42 in some of the translations is because it's trying to follow the same formula that is shown throughout the rest. If you look at the rest of 1 and 2 Samuel, whenever it talks somebody reigns, it'll say, and they lived, or they started reigning at this age, and they reigned for so many years. And so that's where they're trying to use the 30 and the 42. What we can see, there's in the text that stays with the Masoretic text, is the 1::2. Doesn't really make any sense because it literally says, and he lived for 1 year and then he became king. Well, did Saul become king when he was 1 year old? You know, unless his dad sent out a 1 year old to look for 3 lost donkeys, right? It's not how it works. And so basically we're not really sure what it is. The best guess is probably 30 and 42, but with the Hebrew there, it's just hard to tell. Okay. The people are decimated and ill-prepared when the Philistines attack the people. And so let's read verses 5 through 8 and 19 through 22. 5 through 8 says, "And the Philistines mustered to fight with Israel 30,000 chariots, some say 6,000 chariots, 6,000 horsemen and troops like the sand on the seashore in multitude. And they came up and encamped in Michmash, the east of Bethaven. When the men of Israel saw they were in trouble, for the people were hard pressed, the people hid themselves in caves and holes and rocks and tombs and in cisterns. And some Hebrews crossed the fords of the Jordan to the land of Gad and Gilead. Saul was at Gilgal, and all the people followed him trembling." Now verses 19 through 22. Verse 19, "Now there was no blacksmith to be found throughout all the land of Israel, for the Philistines said, Lest the Hebrews make themselves swords or spears. But every one of the Israelites went down to the Philistines to sharpen his plowshare, his mattock, his axe, and his sickle. And the charge was 2/3 of a shekel for the plowshares, for the mattocks and the shekels, for sharpening the axes and setting the goads. So on the day of battle there was neither sword nor spear found in the hand of any of the people with Saul and Jonathan, but Saul and Jonathan his son had them." And so the Philistines garner this huge army. Now, the chariots of the ancient world. Now, when we think about chariots, we're not that impressed because we live in the age of nuclear weapons. Okay? But if you saw the Philistines coming with their chariots, it'd have been like Rommel and his tanks in World War II. I mean, it was just, we live in Chapel Hill. How many of you are familiar with horses? All right. Can anybody here outrun a horse? No. Okay. Not even Brother Randy can outrun a horse. Interestingly, humans are actually better built for long distance running than horses are. But anyways, you can't outrun a horse for short distances. They would also put spikes on the side of those chariots, and they would run through the enemy lines and just literally just mow people down with these chariots. And so these people are fighting the ancient equivalent of tanks, and they've got sickles and plowshares. I mean, it's not very good. And so they're vastly outnumbered. But the people are strong. They're together. They're facing this massive army. And they've got this power and resolve within them that they're not going to be defeated. Right? I mean, it's a facing the giant story. And so here we have this in this chapter. Look at verses 8 through 14. 8 through 14. "He waited 7 days, the time appointed by Samuel, but Samuel did not come to Gilgal, and the people were scattering from him. So Saul said, Bring the burnt offering here to me and the peace offerings, and he offered the burnt offering. As soon as he had finished offering the burnt offering, behold, Samuel came, and Saul went out to meet him and said, to greet him. And Samuel said, What have you done? And Saul said, When I saw the people were scattering from me, and you did not come within the days appointed, and the Philistines had mustered at Michmash, I said, Now the Philistines will come down against me at Gilgal, and I have not sought the favor of the Lord. So I forced myself and offered the burnt offering. And Samuel said to Saul, You have done foolishly. You have not kept the commandment of the Lord your God, for which he commanded you. For then the Lord would have established your kingdom over Israel forever. But now your kingdom shall not continue. The Lord has sought out a man after his own heart, and the Lord has commanded him to be a prince over his people, because you have not kept what the Lord had commanded." So Saul's got this army. They're vastly outnumbered. The enemy's got better equipment. And then he has a problem. The people start to leave. So what does Saul do?
He offers up a burnt offering.
He offers a sacrifice, right? He meant well. He said, I looked across the river, or, the ford or whatever. They had this massive army. The people started to leave. I had to do something. You said you were going to be here, on Tuesday. It's Tuesday, and we haven't seen you yet, so I just did it myself. All right? Now, apparently Saul was not authorized to give this burnt offering. Samuel was. He meant well. He was afraid because everybody was leaving. Right? Does that make it right?
No, he gave in to the peer pressure you're talking about.
That's right. This may be reaching a little far, but this reminds me of churches, right? Saul's got this battle. He's looking at the enemy right across there, and everybody's leaving. They're already outnumbered. They're already poorly equipped. And you don't need to be losing your army when you're already outnumbered and they've got better stuff than you do. So what does he do? We got to keep the people, right? We got to keep the people in here. And so many times churches have the same way. They see Satan, they see the enemy, they see sin, people are leaving, and they say, we got to do something, right? Well, nothing's nothing. We got to do something. But sometimes it's better to do nothing if the only alternative is something God hasn't told us to do. Does that make sense? I realize I said nothing about 12 times in 2 sentences. But, it's okay to do nothing sometimes. Just to sit back and just to wait. Now, we can't live our lives just doing nothing. But if it's transgressing God's will, we need to just take a deep breath and figure out what's going on. But because he gave in to peer pressure in the people, God told him he was going to take the kingdom from his hand.
Reminds me of Aaron when Moses was going on the mountain for a long time. Saul at least fall down as bad as he did.
Yeah, exactly. That's right. The first high priest of the Israelites, right? Melchizedek was already high priest for him. But the very first high priest makes a golden idol. I mean, just think about that for a second. The guy chosen to be the first high priest is the one who actually fashions the golden calf.
And he didn't get removed from office.
Yeah. It just blows your mind, doesn't it? And so it is interesting. And so now after being told that, now we have chapter 14. And in chapter 14, we have Saul and Jonathan going into battle once again against the Philistines. Let's look at verses 6 through 7. Then we'll look at verses 14 through 16. And then we'll look at verses 19 through 23. We can't read the whole chapter for time, but let's read those passages. 6 through 7, 14 through 16, and 19 through 23. And Jonathan said to the young man who carried his armor, "Come, let us go over to the garrison of the uncircumcised, that it might be the Lord will work for us, for nothing can hinder the Lord from saving by many or by few." And his armor-bearer said, "Do all that is in your heart, do as you wish. Behold, I am with you, heart and soul." Verses 14 through 16. And that first strike which Jonathan and his armor-bearer made killed about 20 men within it, were half a furlong's length of an acre of land. And there was a panic in the camp, in the field, and among all the people. And the garrison and even the raiders trembled, and the earth quaked, and it became a very great panic. And the men, the watchmen of Saul and Gibeah of Benjamin, looked, and behold, the multitude was dispersing here and there. Verses 19 through 23. Now while Saul was talking to the priests, and the tumult of the camp of the Philistines increased more and more. So Saul said to the priests, "Withdraw your hand." Then Saul and the people who were with him rallied and went into battle. And behold, every Philistine sword was against his fellow, and there was a very great confusion. Now the Hebrews who had been with the Philistines before that time, who had gone up with them into camp, even they also turned to be with the Israelites who were there with Saul and Jonathan. Likewise, when all the men of Israel who were hidden themselves in the hill country of Ephraim heard that the Philistines were fleeing, they too followed hard after them in the battle. So the Lord saved Israel that day, and the battle passed beyond Bethaven. And so here you had the Philistines who were on the other side of this river or this clearing, and you have Jonathan, who's young, maybe a little arrogant, but he talks to his armor bearer, and he says, "Let's go over there and start a fight." And so these two guys go over there, and they start fighting against these Philistines. And they kill 20 guys like that. Then the earth starts to shake. And they get, the enemy gets a little nervous. Like these two guys just came on here, like crazy guys, and came in here and started killing everybody. And now the earth is quaking. And so they start running around. Now imagine this. Across this gap, this space, you've got Saul and his generals and the priest. And they're talking amongst themselves by the pomegranate tree. And they're looking over there. And imagine yourselves looking over there and just seeing the army, just these masses of people just moving around. And the passage says, before we read there in verses 16 through 23, that Saul just kind of stops and they watch what's going on, thinking, what's going on over there? And as they still continue to talk about the battle plans, they look up again, and now the whole army is just in a tizzy. And so they realize that something is going on, so they just stop drawing up battle plans, and they just attack. And so they go in there and they just rout the Philistines. Did anybody notice anything interesting in the verses we read? Who was in the camp of the Philistines? Jonathan. But a little bit after that, there was somebody who was in that camp who had gone up with them. Hebrews. You had guys fighting on the other team. Why do you think that would be?
I mean, when David went, he served one of the Philistine kings for a while.
Yeah. If you can't beat them, join them, right? And so here you have these guys who are fighting for the enemy. But it becomes apparent that the guys they had signed up to fight with, they're not going to win anymore. So they turn back with the Israelites and start fighting the Philistines. Well, now the guys who were too afraid to fight, who were in the hill country of Ephraim, here the Philistines are on the run. So what do? They join the fight, right? It's like in football. You know those guys. Like the play's already over, and they come dive in on top of the pile and do nothing but hurt their own teammates. You know what I'm talking about? No? Just me? Okay, all right. Moving on. Okay, a little lost right there for a second. All right, so let's look at verses 43 through 46. Then Saul said to Jonathan, as they were chasing, we're going to read that passage, but just a little background information. As they're chasing these Philistines, Saul says, nobody's going to eat or drink anything until the battle's over with. Which was just dumb. I mean, it just made no sense whatsoever. But he's the king. He makes the rules. And he says, whoever does this is going to die. Well, Jonathan's not there, because Jonathan's already over there fighting. And so Jonathan eats something, and he takes some honey. And so now we're in verse 43. Then Saul said to Jonathan, tell me what you have done. And Jonathan told him, I tasted a little honey with the tip of the staff that was in my hand, and here I am, I will die. And Saul said, God do so to me, and more also, you shall surely die, Jonathan. Then the people said to Saul, shall Jonathan die, who has worked this great salvation to Israel? Far from it. As the Lord lives, there shall not one hair on his head fall to the ground, for he has worked with God this day. So the people ransomed Jonathan so that he did not die, then suffered from pursuing the Philistines, and the Philistines went to their own place. Was Saul going to kill Jonathan for what he had done? Yeah. I mean, you got to hold it to Saul a little bit. I mean, he's a man of his word. He says if anybody eats or drinks before this battle is over with, he's going to die. And so he finds out that Jonathan had a little honey. And so he's going to kill him. I mean, he says, the Lord do so to me if I don't do this to you. But who rebels against the king? His people. So Saul has this major victory, but who gets the credit? Jonathan. And his own people won't even listen to him. It's just interesting how fast Saul's, they're praising his name and wanting to kill people in the previous two chapters beforehand, because he's just so beloved. And now it's like, man, Jonathan, your son's the one who gave us the victory. We're not going to listen to you. That's crazy. And so you can already see Saul's grip on the people starting to be loosed. And you see that in 47, 48, and then also 52. When Saul had taken kingship over Israel, he fought against all of his enemies on every side, against Moab, the Ammonites, Edom, against the kings of Zobah, and against the Philistines. Wherever he turned, he routed them. He did valiantly and struck the Amalekites and delivered Israel from out of the hands of those who plundered them. 52. There was hard fighting against the Philistines all the days of Saul, and when Saul saw any strong man or any valiant man, he attached himself to him. And so Saul was a good warrior. They used to sing, Saul has killed his thousands. Now the song changed when David comes on the scene. The handmaidens in Jerusalem started singing, Saul has killed his thousands and David his 10,000s. And so let's look at chapter 15. Miss Pam, I'm so sorry. I'm going to get it later. I'm sorry, I can't see the PowerPoint. Chapter 15. Let's look at verses 1 through 3. And Samuel said to Saul, "The Lord sent me to anoint you as king over his people Israel. Now therefore listen to the words of the Lord. Thus says the Lord of hosts, I have noted what Amalek did to Israel in opposing them on the way when they came out of Egypt. Now go and strike Amalek and devour to destruction all they have. Do not spare them, but kill both man, woman, child, infant, ox, sheep, camel, and donkey." So what does God command the people to do in verses 1 through 3? Wipe them out. What about the little innocent babies? Everybody, right? Anything and everything. Did Saul have a problem with this? But it wasn't the innocent little babies, was it? No, it was the king, right? Let's look at verses 8 and 9. "And he took Agag, the king of the Amalekites, alive, and devoted to destruction all the people with the edge of the sword. But Saul and the people spared Agag, and the best of sheep, and the ox, and the fattened calves, and the lambs, and all that was good, and would not utterly destroy them. All that was despised and worthless they devoted to destruction." They were supposed to kill everything, but what did they leave alive? The best of the best, right? Why did they leave the best of the best alive? Was it to take for their own personal possession?
He said it was to offer sacrifice to God.
Yeah. That's right. Let's look at verses 13 through 14. "And Samuel came to Saul, and Saul said to him, Blessed be you, the Lord. I have performed the commandment of the Lord. And Samuel said, What is this bleating of sheep in my ears, and the lowing of the oxen that I hear? So Samuel starts coming up to Saul, and Saul's just giddy, man. And he just comes up to Samuel and says, Hey, man, God bless. I obeyed the command you gave me from the Lord. Saul thinks he's obeyed the command. Right? Samuel says, Oh, no, you didn't. Look at verses 20 through 21. 20 through 21. "And Saul said to Samuel, I have obeyed the voice of the Lord. I have gone on the mission on which the Lord had sent me. I have brought Agag, the king of Amalek, and have devoted the Amalekites to destruction. But the people took the spoil, the sheep, the ox, and the best of the things devoted to destruction, to sacrifice to the Lord your God in Gilgal." And so once again, Saul pleads his innocence. He says, I obeyed what you said. We've got all this stuff because we're going to take it back to your house, to the altar which you've built, and we're going to sacrifice it to the Lord there. So God told Samuel to kill them all. Saul's mind is what? They're all going to wind up dead anyways, so what's the difference? You ever been told in religion the details don't matter? It's all the same in the end? Was Agag going to die? Yeah, they were going to take him to Gilgal and they were going to kill him there. Were the best of the sheep and the oxen going to die? Yeah, they were going to take him to Gilgal and offer him as a great big sacrifice and show God how much they loved him with this enormous sacrifice. Was it what God asked for? That's right. Does God care about the details? It's interesting in most biblical stories, he is kind of concerned about the details, isn't he? Right? And so I think that's a takeaway for us today. If God's concerned about the details, then we should be too. Verses 28, 32 through 35. Oh, I'm sorry. Let's look at verse 20. Let's look at verses 22. Yeah. "And Samuel said, Has the Lord as great delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices as in obeying the voice of the Lord? Behold, to obey is better than to sacrifice, and to listen than the fat of rams. For rebellion is as the sin of divination, and the presumption is iniquity and idolatry. Because you have rejected the word of the Lord, he has also rejected you from being king." All right, verse 23, interesting phrase here. "For rebellion is as the sin of divination, and presumption is as iniquity and idolatry." What is presumption?
Insubordination.
Insubordination. I thought God would like it. I just assumed that God would appreciate my offering. Right? If you get to make the presumptions, who's in charge? You are, right? You're telling God what he's going to like. That's what Saul says to Samuel. Who are you to tell God what he's going to accept? Right? Presumption is just as bad as idolatry. And so, yes, this happened almost 3,000, a little over 3,000 years ago, but there's a key lesson for us today about that. Let's look at verses 28, 32 through 35. And Samuel said to him, the Lord has torn the kingdom of Israel from you this day and has given it to the neighbor of yours who is better than you. Verses 32 through 35. Then Samuel said, bring here to me Agag, the king of the Amalekites. And Agag came to him cheerfully. Agag said, surely the bitterness of death is past. And Samuel said, as your sword has made women childless, so shall your mother be childless among women. And Samuel hacked Agag into pieces before the Lord in Gilgal. And Samuel went to Ramah, and Saul went up to the house of Gilboa of Saul. And Samuel did not see Saul again until the day of his death. But Samuel grieved over Saul, and the Lord regretted that he had made Saul king over Israel. And I realize that we're almost out of time, and I'm sorry for that. But what are some takeaways that we can apply today from a text about events that happened over 3,000 years ago? What are some takeaways for us? Don't be shy because we're low on time.
It's in severity of God, I think.
Yeah, behold both the goodness and severity. Brother Ed, it almost sounds kind of biblical. What was that? Do what God says? Yeah.
Wait, don't please people. That's what Saul did a lot.
Yeah. He kept trying to please God and the people. Sometimes we can please God and the people, right? But if that's our main goal in life, we're going to fail at both. All right, that's all the time we have. Thank you so much for your comments and your questions. And let's close with a prayer. Dear God, thank you for this day, and thank you for all many blessings you've given us. We're so thankful for your love and your mercy and your grace. Dear Heavenly Father, please be with us as your people as we strive to obey you and your words and your commands that you've given to us. Help us to be humble and to always remember that your word is to be loved, but it's also to be feared, and that our actions need to reflect our love for you and both our willingness to obey you and also our willingness to show others your love, your mercy, and your grace. Please be with us over this week and help us to be shining lights in this community. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.